Hello and welcome to Read Brave, a comic book podcast from the Graphic Media Podcast Network. I am Vinton Bain.
I'm Philip Turkleton.
And Scott is dead.
Here we are again.
Who are you?
I don't know anymore.
Okay, so I watched the last episode of Legion that came on. I watched it live. For the first time in my life, I watched a television show as it was airing.
No, live as it was airing, not live as they were filming it.
No.
Actually, that's a little bit of a lie because we started watching it about 20 minutes into it.
But we caught up to it, though.
We did, which is kind of the worst thing about DVRing is you think that if you start a little later, you don't have to watch commercials, but at some point they do catch up with you.
You have to watch the commercials at the one moment you don't want to watch commercials.
That's because you always underestimate exactly how many commercials there are.
Yeah.
Like if I start 10 minutes in, there's no way there's more than 10 minutes of commercials. No, there's 20.
Yeah,
there's 20
at
minutes
least.
Legion, when it's recorded, is an hour and 10 minutes long. If you watch it without the commercials, it's actually 7 minutes of programming.
They just splice it in such a way that you don't feel like it's that bad.
You're confusing Legion with Walking Dead. That's how it works.
Well, I watch it online, streaming it from the FX website. And what drives me crazy is like the first 2 or 3 commercial breaks will be like 10 minutes long each. And then the next ones are just like one commercial for each break.
Yeah.
And it's like, spread those things out, guys.
Yeah.
I don't want to sit through like a 10-minute long commercial break.
So after I finished watching it, I thought about how much it reminded me of Moon Knight. And I
Got really passive aggressive.
basically begged you both to please read Jeff Lemire's Moon Knight so that we could talk about it.
I gotta be honest.
It was really
Just
aggressive.
mostly aggressive. There was a curse word in it even.
Something like that.
Yeah, not something like that. There was a literal curse word in the text that you texted while I was sitting right next to you, by the way. That's where the passive comes in.
I guess that's true. I was not sitting next to you, so
it just came across aggressive. Now, Vinton, do it now.
But I had been wanting to read Moon Knight anyways, and I had already read, I think, the first 2 issues when you were first getting them.
Yeah.
I had borrowed from you and read them, and I was really enjoying it, and so I had wanted to go back and explore it, but of course, there's
a lot to read.
Many comics out there. So many. But I finally took the time and read it, and I think Scout did too. Did you catch all the way up?
I did.
Nice.
I did it.
We did it.
You didn't know. You didn't know.
Okay. So yeah, I did catch up. I read them all.
So I
You're
want to know
welcome.
what did you guys think of Moon Knight? And second question, 2-part question. Second part of the first question.
It's a puzzle box.
How did you feel it compared to Legion? So my question is, how did you like Moon Knight?
I liked it fine.
And please compare and contrast Moon Knight to FX's Legion.
Similar, but not the same.
Man.
All right, next segment.
Good, not great.
No, I did like it. I really liked it. I liked it more than I thought that I would. I knew from what you told me that it was going to be confusing.
Yeah.
And I waited until, when you sent the message, I waited until the next morning to read it because I knew I needed a clear head to read it. And I just sat down and binge read all of them at once. I can tell right away it's not the kind of thing I'm going to be able to read issue to issue. I'm going to have to wait for trades or until there are a few out at a time. Because there was definitely, even though I was reading all the way through in one go, there was a couple moments when it was like, I have no idea what's happening right now.
Yeah.
So, but I did like it. I mean, it was definitely a trip to read. And I didn't understand at first, so I had to ask, but like, I get now that they change the art according to who he is.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And in retrospect, I do think that's really clever, and it makes it a little easier to keep track of what's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah. And no diss on those other artists who were great artists in their own right, but Smallwood's art is so amazing.
Yeah.
I just can't get over it. It's so beautiful. All those covers are so great.
Yeah.
There's so many panels in there. I just want to like poster size in my room.
Yeah, it's gorgeous. Yeah.
So now that we've got that out of the way, we can talk about what I read this week.
Well, we didn't get that out of the way. I still haven't answered any.
Yeah, you haven't answered.
Well, it doesn't matter what you think.
It doesn't matter what you. So for me, I really enjoyed the whole run. Like I fell in love with it. I think I agree with Scout. When I got to the very end, one of my notes on issue 12, this most current issue on my review was, I'm really upset with myself that I plowed through to this point because now I have to wait, and I don't want to wait for the next issue. I just want to know. I want some resolution. I should have stopped at the end of the volume and waited. What really got me, what I realized though when reading it, is that even though there's 2 volumes out and now they're in the midst of their 3rd volume, this is still basically the same story. The story arc has not changed. It just came to some resolution. Something changed at the end of those volumes and brought it to a new thing with the next volume, but it's still telling the same story. So keep that in mind. This might even be better read as an omnibus.
Right,
than
exactly.
anything else.
Yeah.
But I'm really excited to see where it's going. Jeff Lemire is telling a fantastic story here, referencing a lot of the beginning. So much so that in volume 2, they included one of the issues from the 80s because it referenced it so heavily that reading it actually made more sense out of what they were saying with some of the thoughts and the visions that he was having. Of course, you never know what's exactly real. So what's a thought, what's a vision, what's reality? Which I began to wonder of myself after reading it long enough.
Yeah, no kidding. I felt a little bit like I had a straight jacket on and was rocking back and forth at one point, like not sure which way was up.
Well, to comment on something that you both said, I really feel like it probably would be better enjoyed reading as a trade paperback because there is a lot going on, and just out of the gate, it's not a comic for everyone. It's a really in depth. You have to pay attention to everything that's going on to really get the story.
Yeah, and for someone like me with pretty house, pretty tree syndrome, it was it was a little.
If you are willing to pay that price, you get paid back. You know, tenfold. But you know, I think like for myself, I would rather read it in the trade paperback form. But I'm so excited about this comic that I can't help myself. You know, I have to read it each issue, and I have gone back a couple times and read them start to finish because it does make more sense reading in one big clump or binge reading them.
Yeah, I could definitely see the similarities to Legion in the what's really actually happening and what is just happening inside his mind.
Yeah.
And I think the last episode of Legion addressed the associative identity disorder similarities. So I can definitely see where you thought that they were connected.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, exactly. My thoughts as well there. Stylistically and genre-wise, maybe even, I think they're 2 separate monsters. Like Legion really reminds me of some of my favorite 60s British spy, psychological type thriller stuff that they were doing in television back then. Like my favorite show is The Prisoner, and it's reminded me a lot of that, just stylistically wise. Of course, setting and clothing and things around them. But it's such a fantastic show, and it's such a fantastic comic. I am fine with these things being that close to each other. There's probably something in both of them that speaks to me through that, and there's definitely a connection there, I think.
Yeah.
And I think both of them do the same thing to me, which is as it goes on, my note on volume 2 of Moon Knight was, well, volume 1 was what the hell, volume 2 is what the
Yeah.
And so I can see that happening with Legion too. It's like as it goes on, it's like, yeah, this is already absurd and crazy. What's happening? I don't understand. And it just keeps getting more and more of that to the point where you're like, I didn't think it could get more of that.
Yeah. I didn't think I could be any more confused.
I will admit that I have some hesitation and some worry, and it's not on Jeff Lemire himself, but other things that he's worked on for major publishers. I'm speaking mainly of DC Comics Animal Man. Had this longevity it was going for, and they released multiple volumes telling this one long story, and it ended up being stretched out so far. Like, it started out really good, but they stretched it out so far, I just lost all value to me. I never even finished it, and I heard it didn't even finish well. But I don't think that was his fault. I think that was the publisher's fault because they were trying to tie it in with Scott Snyder's Swamp Thing, another great writer. And Swamp Thing in that was having the same problem from what I've heard, that even though Scott Snyder was writing on it, he's a great writer as well, because they were trying to intertwine them and do this long game thing that didn't end up panning out very well for them. It didn't do well. And so I still have that in me when I think of Lemire and long run stories. And some 4 other publishers on this, everything he does for himself is gold.
Yeah.
Guys, Royal City is brilliant. I'm just going to plug it again. But Sweet Tooth also is another long-running story he did that was really amazing. So I know he can do that, but I worry sometimes about what the publisher is pushing and wanting to do with a thing that alters the creator who is creating it. But Moon Knight itself has shown no signs of anything that should make me afraid of that. So far, it is complete gold to me.
Yeah.
It's just past things that made me worried.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, I think we can move on to what we
Bobby
read this
Newport.
week. And again,
Bobby Newport has never read a comic. Do you want to listen to a podcast that Bobby Newport does?
Newport.
People are going to be so confused.
That's true.
Too.
If you don't watch Parks and Rec, you are lost. And I apologize for nothing. Again, we can say, what did you read this week rather than these past 2 weeks and be right about it. Next time on the podcast, when we say that, it's going to be false and we're going to be wrong because we're not coming back until another 2 weeks like our normal schedule. But for now, we can be right about it.
I read quite a few comic books this week. There were two things that really stood out to me. And it's funny because one of them I had Scout read and she did not like. And one of them you read and you did not like.
No, we're sorry.
That's
Actually,
okay.
I'm not sorry, but
yeah, I mean, you know.
I don't think I read anything this week that I just absolutely didn't like.
You were.
But I was middle of the run on something.
Middle
so
of the run, ambivalent.
Middle of the road, I guess would be the word. There.
So the first thing I read was a original graphic novel called Kinski about a man who basically like kidnaps a dog. He falls in love with this dog, not in a like romantic sense, but just, you know, people love animals. And he has to have it for himself, and he kidnaps the dog, and all these terrible things happen, and he's torn between taking the dog back and keeping the dog for himself, and all these other hijinks happen, and they're like people connecting that like they don't know, like he stole the dog from this person and he's talking to this person. They're talking together, but they don't know that he's the thief and he's the victim or whatever, you know? And so it's just really crazy. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was like a madcap crime caper comedy movie. And I really enjoyed it. I liked it a lot. Scout didn't care for it very much, but that's okay.
I'm sorry.
No, don't be sorry. I mean,
I just felt like it could have used more. I felt like the way it was presented to me felt like a children's picture book. And I think that you could probably dig a little deeper and, you know, wonder what's going on in this guy's head. Is he really just a lunatic? Like what's happening here? But I think that for me anyway, just on the surface, it didn't really do anything for me. But I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, to each his own.
Yes.
I think it's like you really enjoy something, you know, a piece of media, and you want to share it with someone and they don't like it. Yeah. It's kind of a bummer that they don't like it, but you also have to realize that, you know, different strokes for different folks.
Right.
Not everything is going to be for everyone.
Yeah. You can still love what you love.
Yeah.
Exactly.
This is just payback for you Maying Super Sons last time on the podcast when I recommended it to you. Maying is definitely a word.
So, no, like, I like Super Sons. I mean, I didn't think it was going to be good, and it was good. You know, it was what it was. The other thing I read this week that I really enjoyed was Man-Thing. And
that's my exact review for Man-Thing. It was what it was.
But like,
see, and I didn't read Man-Thing because
I saw the
cover. Well, I saw the cover and just thought, I have been so bombarded with just monster stories lately that I couldn't do it. And I think that with doing this podcast, sometimes I push myself and force myself to read things that I know I'm probably not going to like. And so I'm trying, and there's so much out there I want to read that I do like, that unless it's something that you guys suggest to me or we're all reading and researching together, I'm going to try to scale back a little and just focus on the things I really think I'm going to like. Sure. And if I'm not into a monster story right now, I'm probably going to skip it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Anyway, but keep going.
It was exactly what I hoped it would be. It was a monster comic done in a classic monster comic way.
Yeah.
And he had lots of like one-liners and zingers, which I thought was really perfect for the comic book. You know,
that's the exact way I described it. I mean, I think I said it's like a pulp monster comic with a comedic twist. There's like a bit of comedy thrown in there too.
I did not want a horror comic. I wanted something that was going to be campy and fun. Mm-hmm. And so it really delivered. And then in the back was a mini comic that R.L. Stine wrote that was like Tales of the Dark Side or Twilight Zone or some, or
it was like an adult Goosebumps story.
Yeah. And it was really great. So it was just like the icing on the cake. It was perfect. I thought it was the one of the best comics I read this week. And I read, like, everything else I read were things that we consistently talk about, series that we're keeping up with. And while they're all great, I don't think there's need to talk about the same comics, the same 5 comics, the same 10 comics every week. But that's me. I want to bring like something new or different that you might not read or might not have heard of. That's like my goal for the podcast every time.
Well, I didn't do that.
I'm not trying to talk crap on you other two. I'm just saying that's where I'm coming from.
Okay.
Scott, what did you
Well,
read
now I
this
don't want to
week?
talk about anything I
No,
read.
obviously. I just shut you down.
Well, did you guys talk about Royal City last time and I just hadn't gotten to it yet? Is
I
that
did.
what's
Neither
happening?
of you had the chance to read it because
Right.
of the truck.
Okay, so I did read it. And I don't think I like Jeff Lemire's writing as much as the two of you do.
Oh, yeah.
When I read Sweet Tooth, I read the first 2 volumes was all I read. And I didn't keep going because I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so depressed now.
Yeah.
And I think and we've mentioned before that his writing is beautiful. It's emotional. It's deep. He's telling something beneath the surface. I love his art. Anything that he's doing the art on, I'm always going to pick up and check out. This one felt still, while heavy, not quite as heavy as the other stuff, and I'm interested to see where it's going. The mom in the story being horrible was a little bit of a trigger.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I'll read it for a while and see where it goes. I like that it's an everyday story with just a little bit of a twist to it.
Right.
And that's one thing that he does do really well. You know, I don't know if it's the same term in comics, but in fiction they call it magical realism.
Yeah.
And I think that he does that kind of thing in comics really well.
Right. Yeah,
It's an
definitely
everyday
so.
story with just something extra added in to make it a little more intriguing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Cory, did you read that?
I did read Royal City, and I did really enjoy it. I read Essex County, and I really appreciated it for what it was. I thought it was great storytelling, and I really love his art and his style. But I agree with Scout.
It's heavy.
It's so heavy, and I had to take some time to take some deep breaths and recover from the sadness of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like the thorn on the rose, I guess, that his writing he is such a fantastic writer, but everything comes with this really heavy vibe or whatever, and not to say that it's good or bad. It's just,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and I think I'm a firm believer that anything you're reading comes to you at the right time.
Right.
If you're reading something and it's just really bumming you out, maybe it's time to step away for a while, come back to it later. Because I've definitely tried books that I've been like, I really don't like this. A few months later, decide to try it again and go, oh, I actually do really like this. So, maybe best consumed when you're feeling up.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, I did really like it. I think that I read the usual stuff. Motor Crush #4. It's still going really well.
I've fallen behind. I need.
It's
to
okay.
catch up.
It's really great. We're just on issue 4, so probably another couple issues. You can wait until a trade. But this one had some big revelations in it, which I think is doing a really good job of moving the story along. Hawkeye #4.
If I can interrupt you for a second, I forgot to mention that the picture and letter
I forgot
portion
about that.
at the back of Motor Crush was probably the best thing I read all week.
Yeah.
It was so affirming and
it was great.
the world
check
is
that out.
a good place.
Yeah, well, it was a couple of cosplayers thanking the writers for giving a main character in a comic who is a young Black woman, which is a rarity. I mean, we have Ryrie Williams and we have, Moon Girl and
World of Wakanda.
right. So there are things out there, but it is rare right now. And it was a
Yeah.
letter thanking the creators of Motor Crush for that, which was really moving. Hawkeye number 4. Kelly is continuing to hit it out of the park. I think she's setting up something really great. Yeah, continuing to set up something really great. So
I love that. Did you like the sound of music?
I did love the sound of music reference,
So
and it's true. You can't be sad while you're listening to that music. You know?
The thing that stood out to me about the issue was when she said, "Not this looks bad, but this is bad."
This is bad.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Shade the Changing Girl, still my favorite thing coming out of Young
Excellent
Animal right
issue.
now.
Yeah,
it was
a really good
a
issue.
great issue. I want to hand this issue to every young girl in high school right now. You know, not just girl, but like especially girls, but everyone. I mean, it's just it's really saying something, and it's I think it's an important comic for people to be reading right now.
I like the story. I like the writer, but I was having like a hard time staying on board. But this issue really solidified it for me.
Yeah, it's wonderful, and they're going to be. I'm excited to see what happens in the future. So
I don't mean to keep interrupting you. I'm sorry.
It's hard when we read the same things.
I know. Well, and that's the thing is we're all going to talk about the same things. But I did get caught up on Paper Girls. I read 11 and 12. The end of 12 had a moment for me that just like almost made me want to cheer, and probably is not the majority's reaction.
I felt like it was powerful.
Most people will probably go gross, but I was like, okay, yes, you know, like
this is the next angry text message I'm gonna get caught up on Paper Girls.
Well, no. I mean, it was just, and it's, I mean, without giving spoilers to people who haven't read Paper Girls, which you should be doing, or maybe aren't caught up on it. It was a moment that young girls are going to identify with, and it deals with something that no one talks about ever.
Nice.
It's that thing that no one talks about.
One more piece of evidence to prove that Brian K. Vaughan
is
can
a
write
woman.
women. Yeah.
No, can write women.
You'll be happy to know I did pick up
that,
volume 2, so I have it, and since I paid money for it and it's sitting there, I'll probably read it.
Yeah,
pretty soon.
Yeah, I'll quit saying that Brian K. Vaughan is a woman because I don't really believe that. I'm just trying to be funny, and I know I'm not. So, but he definitely understands women. Oh my gosh, I have never read a male writer write women so well, so well. So, yeah, I mean that was pretty much the extent of my week in comics.
Awesome.
Vinton?
Did either of you read America?
That was my comic last week that I wanted to talk about and I couldn't remember.
Okay.
I haven't read it yet, and I'm really sorry. I don't know why I haven't. I think it wasn't in the stack Cory handed me this morning, so it's his fault.
I went to 3 different comic book stores and none of them had copies. But I read it last week when you were setting up to record. Read it, got down to the last 2 pages, and then we had to record, and it was fantastic. It was exactly what I was hoping for. I think I say that like about every issue, number 1. It was exactly what I was hoping for.
Your hopes are just
You're easy to please.
Spot
I guess
on.
So, yeah.
Like you know where to set the bar when it comes to a first issue. I loved it. I thought it was great, and I'm just so excited about her having her own series, this America Chavez series, and just getting to know more about this character because she's not someone that I've really dived into the back catalog of. She's, of course, never had her own series, so you've always had to look at other different teams or different things to find out more about her, and it's been spread throughout. But here we have her own series now, and we can kind of dive into that character, see what she's all about. And the writing and the art on this is fantastic. I just loved it all. So I'm really excited to see where this series is going to go. Of course, you can only tell so much from an issue 1, but it's a great start.
They chose a queer Latina young adult writer for the series, so it was like spot on for the character.
Yeah, definitely so. I also read Man Thing, as we mentioned, and I was really excited about this issue because it's R.L. Stine, and I grew up reading R.L. Stine, and I have no delusions that R.L. Stine is like this amazing writer who writes gold or anything, but he does what he does, and he does it pretty well.
Yeah, he's definitely a formula writer.
Yeah, definitely so. And so when I did come across it, it was exactly what I thought it was going to be. I did enjoy it, but it was just what I thought it was going to be. It didn't exceed anything for me. So I was just kind of like, yeah, that was good. I liked it. I might even read the next one.
I think it works because children who are young enough to read Goosebumps now will like it.
Yeah.
And people who grew up reading Goosebumps will like it.
Sure, definitely. So I think you're absolutely right there. And Man-Thing's not a character that I've dived too deeply into ever before in the comics either. I've read a few things where he's shown up and I've appreciated those things, and I like the mythos behind the character. And of course I like Swamp Thing, and they come from the same type of mythos that was created before either of them. But I don't know much about the character, and I really find it almost amazing that the amazing thing about the comic was how middle ground it was for me. I've never felt just like, yeah, that was good. That was, that was, it was. It's just never happened to me before that much. So I also read Monsters Unleashed, the next issue of that, and it's pretty good. It's still continuing to be pretty good. If you like giant monsters destroying things, yeah, that's your thing. There it is. That's what it is.
Awesome.
One thing that I did, because I watched Logan and because I've been reading All New Wolverine, and I just love where that comic's going, and I loved Logan so much. I loved Laura Kinney in Logan specifically. I went back and reread some of the origin stories, which I had read before. I'm not sure that I've read the second volume of this because it seemed all new to me. But I have a bad memory, so who knows? But I read
every X-23 is all new Wolverine.
That's
for you.
Right. When you reach a certain age, all comics become new again. I read X-23 Innocence Lost, which tells the origin story of Laura Kinney, and then X-23 Target X, which is the immediate follow-up to that volume, which I think was made a bit later, even though it is like telling the story right after that. But they retcon a bunch of stuff, which is weird. They're like, here's this lady who was always there. You just didn't see her in the first volume. Huh. So that's kind of weird that they retcon that way, but they do a good job of it. And it tells this amazing story. It ties in a lot to the Logan movie. You can see where they drew a lot of inspiration. But what it really does is you then see how Tom Taylor is using that as a complete foundation for the story he's telling.
That's awesome.
Everything that he's talking about is referencing that stuff back then. And so having read it just gives this whole new weight to All New Wolverine. And having it fresh in my mind with those characters there, especially the latest issue number 18, is like a capstone on those two volumes. It's like those things that got left in those two volumes that never got addressed again, or they pop up here and there, but they never got an ending or a resolution. Tom Taylor gave us a resolution to these things finally, and it was beautiful. Issue 18 of All New Wolverine was so fantastic. The only thing that I'm confused about is the volume ended with issue 17, but issue 18 feels like an ending to the story arc.
Yeah.
I'm like, why would you start a new volume with the ending to the story arc?
Yeah, I really like that ending.
It was so good.
Yeah, it was heavy.
So beautiful. Now, I'm not going to spoil anything, but there's a moment where she says, I am Laura Kinney, I am Wolverine, and it's, oh man, it gets you right in the heart.
Yeah.
Right in the feels, I think the kids say these days. But yeah, one of the best origin stories ever, I think, X-23 Innocence Lost, and an amazing follow-up to it, X-23 Target X, and that's by the people who created X-23, Craig Kyle and Christopher Yost. Check them out, especially if you enjoyed Logan. You will love them. I almost guarantee it. Guarantee as far as, don't sue me if I'm wrong. I will give you nothing if you think I'm wrong. See, now you can't lie and say I was wrong to get something out of me. I also read Shade the Changing Girl, which was another fantastic ending to a story arc. What a great way to end that story. Of course, the story is still continuing, but the arc, the end of the arc. And I really love the character study that we're getting, that look into who people are and what makes a person and their decisions and these type of things. I love stories like that. That's why I like Stephen King, because he's really good at that character study. I also read some non-Marvel things, which were, we had a couple of really good number ones this past week, or past 2 weeks. I don't remember when. Some of these might have come out the week before and I just didn't get to them. The Once and Future Queen. Did either of you hear of this? The Dark Horse release?
I did read that one.
What did you think of it?
I thought it was pretty good.
Yeah. I enjoyed it a lot. I thought it was a fantastic start to a promising new miniseries. It's just going to be a miniseries for now. I immediately got into the characters, especially Merlin. Merlin was so cool, showing up in a spacesuit and not even realizing it. I love that moment. He shows up and she's like, why are you wearing a spacesuit? And he's like, oh, I guess I am. Time travel's weird. I was like, okay, I like this. But it's super interesting premise, and I really like where it's going. Also read Savage Things, #1. This was a comic but put out by Vertigo, and I wasn't sure I was going to like it after the first few pages. I wasn't really liking where it was going, but as it came to an end, I found myself really engrossed in the story and wanting to know what was going to happen next and being really interested in what they were going to be doing. And of course, this comes from the author of Luther Strode, and I really like Luther Strode. So anything that person does, I do want to check out at least and give a try. But I'm interested to see where this is going. This is definitely a little darker and a little bit heavier than the comics I usually am really into. So we'll see what I think as it continues on. Speaking of dark and heavy and brutal, I also read Extremity #1. And this comic is intense and brutal and emotional. And I really like what they're doing, though. Of course, it's got that like fantasy style sci-fi, like you mentioned, Cory, when you talked about it, and like that heavy metal feeling of the art. What I really like is the artist writing in his greatest fear into the story of losing his hand and losing what it is that makes, like, he finds his identity in his art, and like, what if he couldn't do that anymore? And so he put that into the story as like the main catalyst for everything.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting.
And so I thought that was really fantastic. And other than that, I read Moon Knight, and Moon Knight is really good, guys. Yeah, I recommend it.
I like it. I'm for it. I support it.
So now we're going to move on to our segments this episode. First up, we have the crew from Back to the Movies, a Good Trash Media podcast, to give us their review for Logan, the new Wolverine film.
Hello, Read Brave Comics podcast listeners, and welcome back to the movies. We're your friendly neighborhood movie review podcast from the Good Trash Media Network. And this week, we're taking a good look at the latest road trip movie to smash the box office, starring Jean Valjean and Jean-Luc Picard. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. This week, we're talking about Logan. I'm joined again by my co-host after a temporary leave of absence in which she was mourning the loss of her kind of sort of loved one in Japan. Introduce yourself.
My name is Alexandra Bohannon, or you could call me X23.
I'm going to start calling you that.
Good.
Every time.
Great.
Every time.
I'll get the mutton chops.
I'm also joined by another host. Since his hiatus on People's History of Film, he's been sighted driving limos around the worst parts of El Paso, Texas. Old man Dalton Stewart, welcome back to the movies.
It's me, Dalton Stewart, and go yourself. Different Logan quote from a different movie, but this movie's full of Logan saying the F word, so it felt appropriate.
It's always again a pleasure listening to you on People's History of Film, but I'm really glad that we're able to come and sit down and talk about Logan. Guys, I was very excited to talk about this movie with you.
No, I'm quite excited. It's the first time I've been excited to talk about a superhero movie in a while.
Long time.
Yeah, this actually feels like a superhero movie that needs talking about.
Oh,
and
definitely.
Usually it's just, is it good and or boring, and does it do anything different? Like, it's usually it's gotten to the point where superhero movies are a real short conversation a lot of the time.
Yeah, I mean,
exactly.
Even people with Doctor Strange, it was like, I feel like we've talked about, and when you're talking about, you're like, I feel like we've had this conversation before.
Yeah, we had this conversation when Ant-Man came out.
Yeah, exactly.
We had this conversation, and we had that conversation when Captain America came out. Like, it's just nice to see something do something different.
Exactly. And before we get into our review of Logan, I do remind everyone that we are a podcast on the Good Trash Media Network, and you can find more of our podcast at goodtrashmedia.com if you want to hear more of our lovely dulcet tones on the internet. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for us to review Logan.
She's like you, very much like you.
I am not whatever it is you think I am.
She needs our help.
Someone will come along.
Someone has come along. This is what life looks like. People who love each other. A home.
Logan, as described by IMDb, says, in the near future, a weary Logan cares for an ailing Professor X somewhere on the Mexican border. However, Logan's attempts to hide from the world and his legacy are upended when a young mutant arrives, pursued by dark forces.
That about covers it, yeah.
Yeah, that's the movie.
Before we hop into specific thoughts on this movie, I didn't get to talk with you guys about X-Men Apocalypse, which, thank goodness. I think you guys would have enjoyed that one significantly less.
It's weird that you mentioned that because I just watched it the other day for the first time.
Oh, really?
It's on HBO right now.
First time? I kind of want to watch it again, but first, I want to hear what you thought about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't seen it. I have no desire to.
It's okay.
You're not missing out on anything.
Have you seen Days of Future Past?
No, but I know the premise.
I'll loan that one to you, Alex.
Yeah.
That one's actually pretty
It's
good.
a lot better than Apocalypse. I think, having seen it like 3 times now, with diminishing returns every time I've watched it since the first time I watched it, I think a lot of what made it resonate for me was the nerd buttons it was punching. What Days of Future Past, I think, is trying to do is kind of similar to what Logan is trying to do. It's just Days of Future Past kind of fails at it organically. It's trying to be kind of a send-off to the original trilogy X-Men films, right? It's trying to say farewell to Storm and Cyclops and Jean Grey, as we've seen them portrayed by Halle Berry and Famke Janssen and James Marsden, and it has a little bit of that, and it's it's saying bye to Ian McKellen and all of these other characters. The actor whose name escapes me that played Iceman, all these characters we saw in X-Men 1 through 3, but it's too wrapped up in like also continuing the franchise that's ongoing. Like it's a very uncohesive film, whereas Logan does all of that exceedingly well.
I'm going to disagree with you, but that's okay. I want to hear what Alex has to say.
I'm just kind of confused as to how. I mean, I know what the plot of Days of Futures Past is. Day of Futures Past? Days
of Future Past.
Of Future Past.
Who cares? They're all made up words.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
All
Whatever.
words are made up.
Yeah.
And they're X-Men. It especially doesn't matter what the X-Men continuity.
Time travel, whatever. Okay. So that's my thing, is because I know that the whole deal is like they get to the end and it's like, oh man, we fucked up, like there's no mutants or whatever, and they go back in time to like try and make the ending better or whatever.
Sort of. So there are mutants left. They're like left in a resistance, and they have to. They send Wolverine's consciousness back in time,
right,
to the 70s
to stop an assassination from happening, which is
it's simultaneously like more apocalyptic for the whole world in that future, but less apocalyptic for mutants, and in that there are still mutants around. They're just being hunted,
right?
Whereas in Logan, there are like we get the sense that there's maybe like 1,000 mutants left in the entire planet.
Yeah. Okay, and I will say this: the benefit Logan has is they just James Mangold, Hugh Jackman. They're like, screw continuity.
Well, they were like, well, Bryan Singer already f***ed it up, so like it doesn't matter.
Well, okay, so I will come to the defense of Days of Future Past. That's one of my favorite superhero movies, by the way.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. Now I will say for a few reasons. One, there's some fanism there. I'm gonna point out my bias. I think Bryan Singer's X-Men 1 great for the times, kind of aged not very well. I think X2. I don't understand why X2 is not in the pantheon. I really don't.
I haven't seen it in a long time, so I can't. I don't want to speak to its quality.
It hits on so many of those themes that X-Men's known for in the comics. Prejudice. There's this great scene in the film when they go to Bobby Drake, that Iceman's parents' house, and they find out he's a mutant, and like the way they react. Have you tried not being gay? I mean, mutant.
Yeah. It's not really coded at all, which I think is kind of cool.
But that's what's kind of always been cool about the X-Men.
Yeah.
And I think it does that with the sophistication, but there's also a number of like, holy shit, badass. There's a Magneto breaks out of prison by draining the iron out of this dude's body. I mean, it's pretty cool.
And I think what Logan does, to go back to, I think works really well about those first 2 X-Men movies. And again, I haven't seen either of them in several years, but to my recollection, what works about those movies that we miss on current superhero films is the small scale stakes, right?
Yes.
The action scenes in those movies are quite small, and that was a budgetary constraint. But as far as like the action happening is not, no buildings are being blown up.
No, it's not like X-Men Apocalypse where it's like, hey, Apocalypse is CGI destroying the whole planet.
I think what Logan captures that those other movies get is small scale stakes.
Yeah.
It works without that. It's much like Unforgiven.
Yeah.
In that. Do you know that Westerns are a thing? Okay, well, Unforgiven will work. As long as you have some sort of cultural awareness of Westerns, Clint Eastwood's Unforgiven film works as like a punctuation mark on the end of the sentence that was the revisionist Westerns of this works for you without you having like a firm care for the X-Men franchise.
Does it work on its own without intrinsic deep knowledge of the franchise? Yes.
Okay.
Are you aware that Logan is played by Hugh Jackman? You'll be fine. Okay.
I also agree. I think this works especially in 2017. Superhero films as a genre started with X-Men. So 17 years in, I think this works as a standalone film because we've been so inundated with superhero films that not only is this works as a standalone film, this works as a way to evolve the superhero film and grow it into some really interesting directions. Much in the same way we had revisionist Westerns who said, you know what, we're gonna remove these key elements from Westerns. what happens if it's not good versus bad cops and robbers?
What if it's more gray?
What if it's more gray?
Yeah.
I think this film definitely, in the same way, does the same thing for superhero films that revisionist westerns did for westerns.
Well, and I think the go-to revisionist western, as we mentioned a little bit ago, is Unforgiven, right? I mean, there are really throughout the 70s and 80s, Clint Eastwood was only making revisionist westerns, from Outlaw Josie Wales to things like Pale Rider and High Plains Drifter. All of these films are revisionist westerns. But what Unforgiven does is really kind of say, this is the last revisionist western. As you mentioned, Caleb, X-Men, Bryan Singer, Patrick Stewart, and Hugh Jackman helped launch what we are in right now. Just like you had Clint Eastwood closing out the book on Unforgiven, you have Hugh Jackman, who is kind of responsible. His charisma, his performance of Logan is responsible for superhero movies as we understand them right now.
Easily the most iconic guy playing a superhero right now.
Oh, I mean, more so than Robert Downey Jr.
Yeah, exactly. I would say so. I really do think, film cinema, we're going to be studying Hugh Jackman's impact for a long time, because he's endured the full swing. He's done from sci-fi B-movie all the way to summer blockbuster, and now character drama, and now we're in revisionist superhero film. He's done all of it.
In this one franchise.
Yes.
More than Sean Connery is associated with James Bond, will Hugh Jackman be associated with Wolverine? I mean, Wolverine is drawn to look like Hugh Jackman now in the comics. That's just the way it is. That is impact, right? So it makes perfect sense to end this film. And I'm glad that him and James Mangold became such good buddies on working on the Wolverine. And I think it made sense to have somebody who would touch this franchise before do this final film.
Sure.
This was more of the R-rated superhero foray that I wanted, more so than Deadpool. Like, R-rated comedies are fun. They're not really necessarily my bag, my cup of tea. I'd much rather see a hard R action movie any day over an R-rated comedy. And I think that everything in this movie, like, tonally, I mean, this movie had to be R to convey the severity of the stakes, to convey the tone that this movie is going for. This movie is not lighthearted, y'all. Like, this is not going to be your popcorn eating Doctor Strange moment. Like, I went to a screening. It was a Sunday night in about prime time, 7:15, modestly full theater. At the end of our screening, someone just shouted, "Oh God, why?" There were echoed sniffles throughout the entire auditorium. This movie truly, I think it does what we've expect from Hugh Jackman, from Patrick Stewart. It is a love letter, and a tragic one at that, but it does feel so final and like a good way to preserve their legacy. I don't know. It's like a really beautiful, ornately carved tombstone.
These aren't just good superhero roles. This film is written like a grade A script. This is great Patrick Stewart material. This is Patrick Stewart and Hugh Jackman have legitimately. They have material that I think is worthy of their acting chops in this film, which is not something I could say for pretty much most of the X-Men films or superhero films.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Well, they get something to do.
Yeah,
right?
Well, they have emotions to feel. They actually have a part to act besides just pointing at something and having CGI make it move later. This feels more akin to Hell or High Water than Guardians or Civil War.
Well, and I think that's because this film and Hell or High Water share all the same like touchstones and reference points.
Yeah.
Well, Alex touched on something that I want to mention. When Deadpool came out last year, there was this big talk about, are we doing revisionist superhero films now? And the answer was no, not yet.
Yeah.
Because first of all, there's another movie that did literally everything Deadpool did, and it's called Kick-Ass. Like, literally everything else. I'm sorry, Deadpool is just Kick-Ass with a more compelling lead.
Yeah, exactly.
I like
Ryan Reynolds is more charming than Aaron Johnson.
And I like Aaron Taylor Johnson a lot. He's no Ryan Reynolds. Those films understand, Kick-Ass and Deadpool and a couple of other films, they understand that violence and trope awareness and cursing, that's all part of like cracking open the superhero genre. They get that that's part of it, but they don't realize that there is something missing, and it's not the dourness. And while I think, the gore and the cursing and the trope awareness, those help Logan get where it's going. And the dourness and the somber tone, that helps get Logan where it's going. But that's not it, because BVS was dour, and that movie's a fucking pile of dog crap. All three of those films are trying to engage with superhero movies in a way that is on paper interesting, but they're missing that something special. And I think it's Hugh Jackman, it's Patrick Stewart, but it's also a really thoughtful deployment of characters and stakes, right? And that's what really does the legwork in this film. And again, all the violence and the swearing, all that helps. But at the end of the day, what makes this work is that I believe Logan doesn't want to help this little girl. I believe it. I believe he wants nothing to do with Laura. And it's not because he's a bad person. It's because it hurts too much.
Yeah.
Every time he tries to be a good guy, he fails. And that's how he sees, whether or not that's really how it is, he sees every time he fails as a personal failure as opposed to a bad guy did a bad thing. He sees it as, I am complicit. I was a bad guy because I couldn't stop a bad thing from happening. And what makes that relationship, those emotional stakes work is that flip. Right? Throughout the X-Men movies we've seen, Patrick Stewart spends his time trying to stop Logan from being a bad guy, to guide Logan into being a good man. And in this film, we have Logan trying to do that for Xavier, because Xavier, the last thing he ever wants to do is hurt anybody. And he literally can't help but hurt people. And what Logan is trying to do is the exact same thing that Xavier did for him. And I think, again, all of these things that I'm talking about, that is what makes this film work, is the complicated interlocking wheels of this triad, right? Is Laura, Logan, and Patrick, Xavier. It's those interlocking wheels are what make this film work. It's not that I saw claws come out of the front of a guy's face. That was dope, but that's not why this film works.
No, absolutely. I agree with everything you guys have said around the table, because I really do think that the father-son dynamic, the parental dynamic, really, because you've got three generations of people right here. You've got Professor X and Hugh Jackman, but also you get to see what he's going to pass down to Laura. He didn't expect it. He didn't want her. And I think that's what's really great. And I think the thing that movie's hitting on really well is that Hugh Jackman, Wolverine, is a character who killing people is kind of the easy part. Like, it's easier because he's learned how to distance himself from the violence, and he hates doing it, but it's still something he does and he can put up with. Having close human relationships, though, he can't do it. He does not, again, the emotional articulation. It's very difficult for him to get attached to people because, as you say, everyone around him dies. And what's really cool about this movie is I think it works standalone, but there are a lot of references. There's just a lot of very vague references he mentions where if you've been invested in the franchise, it just adds weight to it, right?
Yeah.
I think it has its cake and eats it too.
Without doing that kind of busy sort of, franchise building type shit.
Exposition-y. Hey, we can tell stories like this. Superheroes are worthy of getting stories like this told for them, because that's the thing. I really think that this movie doesn't look at superhero films as a genre. It uses superhero films as a platform, like almost like a media of its own, So we'll go ahead and give our recommendations now before we hit on spoilers. Did you like the film? Is it worth purchasing? Is it full pricer only? Is it a matinee film? You go see it at a discounted price? Is this a streamer, so you wait for the Netflix or Hulu? Or is this totally trash? It seems like we have a certain bias a certain way, but I do want to get everyone's quick take. Alex, start with you. How would you recommend the film?
I'd say this is a full pricer. If I'm going to be watching a modern Western anytime soon, I probably would prefer watching Hell or High Water instead of Logan. That's just more of a personal preference, not necessarily, a mark of its quality. I do enjoy this film a lot. That's kind of where I got it. I saw it at full price and I was not upset that I did. I was very fine with that.
Very cool. Dalton Stewart, your recommendation?
Yeah, if this franchise really does it for you, it's definitely a shelfer. It's easily the best Logan movie and definitely in contention for one of the best X-Men movies. It's good. It's real good. If you're like me, where you really like X-Men as an idea, but aren't really wild about these movies, especially the last four, then it's definitely worth going to see in the theater and paying premium price for it. See it now. Go. If you haven't seen it, if you are listening to the show and haven't seen it yet, I'm kind of surprised. I will say this: I think it's worth seeing twice in theaters. It's worth dropping money on twice, but unless you're a real diehard X-Men fan, you probably don't need to buy this.
Thank you, Dalton. And I'll go up even higher. I do think this is a shelfer. Now, granted, admittedly, I've said at the top of the show, and I'll say it again, I am biased. I love these characters a lot. I feel like the way I feel about this film is the same way I felt about Deathly Hallows Part 1, which is a film I actually liked a lot more than The Populace, because it is slow, and it is character-driven, and it's a film that lets you breathe and spend time with those characters. But a lot of that has to do with what I brought to the material. And I love the X-Men. I love Wolverine. So this is definitely going to be an absolute shelfer for me. If you're not a diehard X-Men fan. I think Dalton's right about the full price it twice, because a couple of reasons. One, I think it's that good. I think it's worth seeing twice. And I do think if we want to see more air quote grown up comic book movies, films that are actually taking the ideas of what these characters stand for and telling a more evolved, interesting, nuanced story, I think you need to support this film. Now, obviously, it's doing very well, but I think, again, your dollar is not going to hurt. Thank you so much, Read Brave Comics listeners, for tuning into this little bit of our review of Logan. If you want to hear a more in-depth, analysis-driven review of Logan, as well as a full-blown spoiler section, make sure to head on over to goodtrashmedia.com this Thursday to get meatier details of our talk of Logan. I think you will really enjoy what we have in store for you there. And now, before we tune out, I do want to let the listeners know where they can find all of us online. Alex, where can people find you online?
What's up? You can find me on Twitter at Alex V Brohannon, BROHANNON. You can also find me on Instagram, same handle. You can also find me on Letterboxd, Alex V Books.
Dalton Stewart, where can people hear you online?
You can find me on Twitter at doll_stew. You can find me on Letterboxd. I think I'm just Dalton_Stewart over there, but just search Dalton Stewart on Letterboxd. You'll find me. I love following people on Letterboxd. I love reading people's reviews. It's fun. And then you can find me every single week over at Good Trash Genrecast.
And of course, you can always find me on Twitter at CMastersTalk or on Letterboxd and Instagram at CMasters91 if you want to keep up with more of my movie-going habits. Follow all of our other podcasts on Twitter at good_trash or on Facebook at facebook.com/goodtrashmedia. Thank you so much for tuning in today, Read Brave Comics listeners, and until next time.
Next up, we have another segment talking about Robins from Joshua Unruh, specifically this time talking about my favorite Robin, Tim Drake.
Back by popular demand, it's me, Joshua Unruh, ready to talk more about Robins. No, really, people requested more of this. Okay, fine. Vinton requested more of this, but he runs the circus, so his word is good enough for me. Today, we're going to confine our talk to just one Robin, the guy I most often think of as my Robin, Tim Drake. Tim is officially the third Robin and showed up not long after Jason died. You see, losing a Robin was tough on Batman, a lot tougher than it was on those of us who voted for his demise. And when things get tough for Batman, he's not always the best at asking for help. He became more violent and reckless. So much so that Tim, as Batman and Robin's biggest fan, noticed. Now, I know that in a post-Batman vs. Superman world, it's pretty out there that Batman might not always be a sociopathic lunatic loner ready to brand and or slaughter petty criminals like animals. But trust me, comic book Batman is the guy against whom other superheroes measure their restraint. So when he starts getting shot and stabbed because he's running headlong into fights without any preparation or forethought, then it's not ridiculous that his greatest fan would notice. And let's talk about Tim's greatest fan status. Do you know how this random kid convinced Batman he needed a Robin? Well, first, he deduced the dynamic duo's secret identities. He did this by seeing Robin pull a signature Flying Grayson's maneuver. Then, he didn't tell anybody what he'd deduced, ever. At least until he showed up on Dick Grayson's doorstep to say, "Look, I know who you are, I know who your mentor is, and something is rotten in Gotham." Then, and this is my favorite part, he convinces a very reluctant Batman that first, Batman needs a Robin, and second, Tim doesn't want to do the job. He doesn't think he's up to the task, but somebody has to do it, and he's in the best position to make it happen. Right from the beginning, you saw Tim painted as the anti-Jason Todd, which, according to the logic that led to Jason, you'd think would make him into another Dick Grayson. Except, as established, Jason wasn't the anti-Grayson they wanted him to be. He was just a bad idea. So here we are with a kid who is A, already a crackerjack detective the day he shows up at the Batcave, B, is responsible enough to know that the job of Batman's protege is incredibly dangerous, C, says that danger is why he doesn't want to do it, but D, it's the right thing to do and he'll by God do it anyway. This kid, you guys. Tim is the most intellectual of the Robins, acing the computer science side of things and the detective work. He's probably the world's second greatest detective after Batman. Yet he struggled with the physical parts, always being a bit subpar in the martial arts and acrobatics areas. This is a kid comic book nerds could relate to. Tim showed up in 1989, but he would spend a great deal of time, both in and out of fiction, in training before he was allowed to don the all-new and improved Robin outfit. Once he did, however, he started a solo adventure in one of 3 extremely successful miniseries. He went to France to train in an esoteric martial art, and eventually wound up teaming up with an ex-CIA agent and Lady Shiva, the most dangerous woman on Earth, all to face King Snake, who would remain a nemesis of Tim's for decades. Tim enjoyed the success of 2 more solo series, including one where he faced off against and defeated the Joker on his own. And then the kid got his own solo series, a first for any Robin. This book ran for 183 issues from 1993 to 2009. He also founded and led Young Justice, and eventually led the Teen Titans. Not only that, but at one point, Bruce kicked him out of the cave and insisted that he get along on his own while at boarding school. Alfred so disapproved of this decision that he left Bruce's employ to enter Tim's as Robin's aide-de-camp. He's also best friends with Connor Kent, aka Superboy. Tim has literally been the world's next finest. Through most of his time as Robin, Tim hasn't been an orphan. He had to maintain a secret identity from his father as well as various sets of friends, including while attending said boarding school. And he had to keep his secret identity from various girlfriends. Although my fanon is that he's a closeted homosexual and the disastrous disinterest he showed to every love interest is the biggest reason why. The most notable girlfriend is Stephanie Brown, aka the Spoiler, aka the 4th Robin, aka the 3rd Batgirl. Oh, we will discuss Stephanie, my friends, just not today. Since then, some continuity shenanigans have happened, and Tim now operates as Red Robin. But for me, he'll always be my favorite Robin. I may love Dick for being first, and I may love Damian for being the best Robin Dick could have as Batman. But Tim is the guy who showed a generation of us the hard work and danger that being Robin entailed. All while also showing us that he'd never quit. You know, just like Batman, only younger. If you want suggestions on Tim Drake stories to read, I highly recommend literally any of those original 3 miniseries, especially the first one. And all of those 183 issues, especially the voluminous number written by Chuck Dixon. That guy knows how to do action comics, you guys. That's all the Robin info I've got for you today, but stay tuned for next time when I tell you about the daughter of a supervillain turned vigilante turned Robin turned Batgirl, Stephanie Brown, as well as the tale of how DC done Stephanie wrong. Tune in then, same Robin time, same Robin channel.
Recommendation time. Cory, what do you recommend to us and our listeners?
Well, I've recommended Moon Knight. This is our 23rd episode, I think.
Yeah.
I've recommended Moon Knight like 22 times. So
I don't know if that's factual.
Well, it's not fake news.
Go back and listen to every episode and then come back and tell us if that's true or not.
I've recommended.
This is your mission.
I've recommended Moon Knight several times, so I won't recommend it because I feel like I've already made my opinion known on Moon Knight.
In saying that, I think you were recommending it though, so I think it counts. Go ahead and tally if you're listening and counting.
That makes 23 episodes. I'm going to recommend that you try some issue number 1s. Try some new stuff that comes out. Don't read anything about it. Just look at it, see if it looks cool to you, and try it out.
I'm really good at that. I always forget that I could actually read about these comics before they come out. Instead, I go, oh, this looks really cool. Oh, and has that person on it? I'll check it out. I never go in reading a summary. I don't think I've ever read a summary for a comic.
I think that sometimes you're going to lose, but most of the time you're going to win when you try something that looks good. You just go by feeling. I think that you can judge a book by its cover.
That's exactly what I was just going to say.
Telepathy.
I do that a lot of the time. If a cover looks interesting, most of the time it's going to pay off.
My theory is that if someone took the time to make a good cover, then they took time to make a good book.
Yeah.
The only time I think that doesn't ring true is with the major publishers who hire completely different artists sometimes to do their covers than the people who work on the inside.
That's
so you're like,
true.
this looks amazing. Then you open up and you go, oh, that's not that person.
Yeah. Scott, what do you recommend this week?
I don't know.
Okay.
No, I don't.
You recommend not knowing, or you don't know what to recommend?
I feel like everything I read this last week, for the most part, besides Moon Knight and besides Royal City, were things that I've been keeping up with that have continued to be really wonderful. So, I mean, I don't know. I do know that Coady and the Creepies comes out Wednesday.
My gosh.
So maybe
So
I'll just
excited.
recommend that everyone go buy that.
Yeah.
Because I already know it's going to be awesome. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
check that out.
We're going to end this podcast with a song by the Creepies that was released. Liz Prince and friends orchestrated and put together and recorded a song that is going to be quote unquote by the characters of the comic. And it's so amazing. We wanted to share that with you guys. So we reached out to her and got a copy to share with you at the end of the podcast.
And
so
she
we're
was
gonna
so
be
nice
ending
to
with
send
that.
us an MP3.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yes. Thank you, Liz. You're amazing. So I definitely recommend also that while you're listening to this, you go out to the store and you get Coady and the Creepies.
And while you're at it, go out and pick issue 5. Pick up issue 5 of Doom Patrol, but be sure to get the variant copy, which features Farrell Dalrymple's art.
Oh, shoot. Is that today?
Yes.
Brian, you better have my copies, son. Well, I recommend America as my newer issue, but I'm also going to reach into that back catalog.
The comic, not the country.
And the country,
Definitely
don't
the
come to the
comic and not
country
the
right now. We're trying to find a way out, so don't come down.
Read America while you're in Canada.
Basically.
And just choose to believe that that's what we're all about as a country. It's the perfect book descriptor of us. So, yeah.
It's not the garbage heap we're all living in right now.
Yeah.
But I would mostly like to recommend, and you probably already picked up on this, X-23, the first 2 volumes of the origin story. That's X-23, Innocence Lost, and X-23, Target X by Craig Kyle and Christopher Yost. Especially if you have any interest in Laura Kinney at all from the comics themselves or from watching Logan, which you probably should have done. If you didn't, then I recommend you go see Logan again. I'm just going to recommend that.
Don't take
Once
your
again,
kids.
Don't take your kids, especially not your toddler.
Hide
Maybe your kids if they're over 18. Maybe if you're you're in your 40s, your kids in your 18,
Hide
your
your
kids are over
kids, take
18.
your wife.
It's all fine. Hide your kids, take your wife. Date night.
If you're, but Vinton didn't take his wife because he's sweet and knows what his wife likes.
And then I described it to Jeffrey when she was like, "I am glad I ain't go see that movie." We are a listener-supported podcast. You can kick us some support on Patreon to the whole Graphomania Podcast Network at Patreon, that's patreon.com/Graphocast, GRAPHOCAST. If you'd like to get in contact with us, check us out on Twitter at read_brave. Email us, contact@graphocast.com, or personally, I'm at Flesh Eater on Twitter.
At Scout Casto.
What's green and has 4 wheels?
Cory's
grass. I lied about the wheels.
Okay. See, he told a joke because he's not online. You can't.
I've got time to learn jokes because I'm not spending all my time.
But he's still looking
on
at
social
Twitter.
media.
He's still looking at Twitter.
Send an email.
Creeping. I'm doing that like Homer Simpson thing where I just like fade into the bushes.
Fade into the pizza?
Yeah.
There's a version of that where he's fading
it's
into
much
pizza
better.
and it's so much better.
Yeah.
On that note,
Yeah.
what pizza?
So enjoy this song by the Creepies. Creepies are go.
Creepies are go!
And pick up Coady and the Creepies today. Goodbye, everybody. Hello and welcome to Read Brave, a comics podcast.
Graphomania Podcast Network.
No.
Read Brave.
Read
comics.
I don't.
Listen, I'm going to go get some ice cream while you guys talk over each other.
Taco?
Tacos.
I'll take tacos too.
This podcast is taking a week-long break, guys. Sorry.
This has been a Graphomania production. If you would like to hear more podcasts, go to graphocast.com, graphocast.com. Follow us on Twitter at Graphocast and like the Graphomania page on Facebook for news and updates.